Hi there, I'm Vera O'Connor and welcome to my studio. Now I wanted to continue with our tide pool series here, and you can see this focuses on above and below the water. Now you can evolve it and make it more detailed if you like, or you could keep it very simple, something like this, and just put some color in and crabs and eyes and have a lot of fun with this. This is great for kids. And the thing for adults, what you'll learn about this is we have a landscape above and how to get the reflection in and the idea of painting underwater. So even though this may seem like it's very elementary, there is a lot to learn in that particular lesson. Now, what I wanted to do is continue with that series and show you how you can easily paint a little hermit crab. Now, this one is very simple and it's a lot of fun for kids or new beginners, but if you wanted to make it a little more advanced, this is another way of doing it. And what happens with this, you can see we're working with shading the eyes and how to get a little bit of depth inside the shell. Even though these seem like very simple lessons, or maybe they don't. The idea is we're getting shape in there, we're working with a subject that's fun, and then you can apply it into your own paintings later, or really any subject, because what you learn here can be applied to any of these other things that I have in my studio. So let's get started and have some fun. Now for this painting, we'll be doing a little hermit crab. And as you know, hermit crabs like to make their homes in seashells, or almost anything that it can curl into. And now if we look at the shells, you can see since they're old shells without any snails in them anymore, what ends up happening is all the sharp points are usually worn down from being tumbled in the ocean. Now we're going to try to keep this really simple. And in order for us to see the shell, if I just used clean water, it's going to be really hard to see against the white paper. So I'm going to drop a little tinted water in there, and you can see in my palette there isn't really much color. But I'm going to go ahead, just put that in there, and in fact, I think I'm going to cover our little crab too. And then I'm going to try to get an idea of where I want to place the pattern on the shell. Then I'll go ahead and skip my brush and create a broken line and curve it over my shell. Then using that same color, I'm going to think about where the shadows are and how could I tuck him back inside his shell. I want to leave the legs out in the light, but I want his little body to be back underneath the shell. So I'll use this as a shadow color. Now to help the shell look round, I'm going to add some shading to the side. And that's basically just using my blue and my brown, and then adding some color to the side, and then softening it with clean water so the middle of my shell is light. Then using that same color, I'm going to go ahead and just try to give him some shadows along his legs. A little bit of pink in there might be nice, and that would be similar sort of to this. And I'll skip my brush, that might be fun. And you can see I'm not going straight. I'm trying to have this edge up here turned a little bit more. And then I have a couple little dots there. I'm just playing with the amount of pressure on my brush. And maybe on this side, I'll have smaller strokes. And then over here, we might even break this up a little bit. I like how this is developing. I like that we had our first color underneath and that we're putting these strokes right on top of them. And then maybe we'll break it up a little bit more. I wonder how this stroke will look. Just little tiny dots. That's fun. And if it's too much, I can always go ahead and just take another brush and soften them. And how about, let's go ahead and maybe, do you see what I'm doing here? Is just dab, 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 like that. And just touch a few of those spots. Basically, all I'm doing is thinking that this is the top of the shell, and I'm curving that one up there. As I go up to the top, I'm curving it over to the side, and that is what's making the difference. And then over here, let's go ahead, what do we want to do? Maybe make a wider stroke like that. It might be a little big. I'd like it to be a tiny bit smaller, but this will be fine. Look at that. He's got a very fancy shell. We don't have to be exact here. So I could continue with this color, or I could get a little more dramatic. And to do that, I'm going to take more of that blue, a little more brown, go into a darker value. Now the reason why I'm doing this instead of using a black is that a black is going to look pretty intense, and I don't want that. I want something a little bit softer. I'm a little curious. I see purple over there, and it just caught my eye, so I think I'm going to take a little bit of that purple. Like I said, it just caught my eye. And I'll put that in. It isn't much. It's actually more of the same color here, just in a slightly darker value. A little more blue in there. And then let's think about his shadow. Let's take a look at this. If I had black, it's going to be very heavy. And then I'm going to go around his eye like this. Let's take a look at that. I don't mind it bleeding into that area. It's going into the color up there. And let's go along this shell. So what I'm trying to do is tuck him back in his shell, just like that. I want to leave his eyes alone, for right now anyway. And let's see, let's go down here. I should wait for this to dry, but I think that I might be able to get away with it. So I'm going to continue. Just like that. And if there's any color that is run or bled or doesn't look right, I'll just try to fix it later. I want the dark part back there. That's looking good. Now let's get his little, I want to separate these legs a little bit if I can. So I'm going to go a little darker down here. Let's see, is that going to stand out? Maybe. And maybe a little bit darker there. I'm just going over the color that I already have, like that. And he's going to have a little bit of a shadow underneath him. And I'm doing the same thing that I did on the shell right here in his joints, and just maybe making a dot here and there. I don't need to have connected lines. The broken lines are going to look much better, because if they are all connected, then it can look a little distracting. Now, if you might get the idea right here. You can see that those lines draw a lot of attention, so what I can do is just take a damp brush and soften a few of those edges like that. Let's shape his little claw down here. Now I want to be careful not to do too much. Okay, so that's looking good. He needs his antennas. I really need to be careful that I don't get too fussy in the body. So I think what might be fun, if I took the brush, let's spatter a little bit of that color on there. It would make his shell look fancy and much more detailed. So I'm basically holding the brush higher up the handle, tapping the tip, or tapping the end, and then letting the tip bounce. And I'm also curious what would happen if I took a little bit more color. It's not much more color, It has a little bit of yellow, a little bit of that pink. Oh, I think it's looking great. You can also do this. That's a little easier, and then for any of the color that's on the outside, just pick it up with a little paper towel, just like that. Okay, now what I want to do is get a bit more detail in there, but before I do that, he needs to dry. Now I'm thinking maybe I want this shell to have a bit more color, so I'm going to take a little bit more of my blue, a little bit more of my brown. What do I have over here? That's an interesting little reddish color. Maybe I have a little bit of purple over there. Let's see what I have. I just want a stronger color, and let's see. Am I going to like that? It's pretty similar to our shadow in there. Just want it to be darker so it steps away from the white paper. That's what I'm thinking about. Let's get a little blue. And maybe a little bit up there. I don't want much, so then I'm just going to soften the edge with a damp brush, just like that. And now I think that shell stands out a bit more. And then let's do the same thing over in this area. Let's get them to stand out. I think it's working. And let's see, let's go ahead and think about our lines again in our shell. I'm thinking that this shell has been worn down by the ocean. And I don't want it to have so many lines, so I'm just going to soften a few of those edges, just like that. But I do want some color along the edge, so that way, like I said, it doesn't just disappear into the white paper. Okay, I think he's starting to pop out. Let's do a little bit more over here. Now we have a lot of color in that shell. Now his legs wouldn't be really smooth. They would have some little dots, so I'm going to use that same basic color. Let's go ahead and just maybe put a few little dots in like this. And some over here. I'm not thinking about the antennas yet because I don't want that color to smear. And this brush doesn't exactly have a great point on it, but I can use it. I'm just barely touching the paper, little dots here and there, just like that. Let's get a few more over here, and I could be much more careful if I wanted, but this does the job. Maybe we'll put a few little dots up here if you wanted. A few, just a little bit. And then I'm thinking I still want to tuck them back into his shell. So I'm going to go a little darker right through here, just like that. Go around it like this. That's working. And how about a little bit down here? I think that works. And so now we have that dark line contrasting this. It tucks him back into a shell, and I don't want that hard line to be distracting, so I'm just going to soften that edge a tiny bit so it looks more like a shadow. We're almost ready for his little eyes and antennas. Give him some texture on his shell. I do like those few little dots over there. I could leave them or lift them out. Okay, now for his eyes, I'm going to go with the black. Now you could use a permanent marker if that helps, if it makes it easier for you, but let's go ahead and get his eyes in. Now he's got great big eyes, and I would like to try to be careful, so I'm using a small brush. And let's get his eye in over here. I'm trying to be careful. So he looks like he's, so it's standing out a bit. The eyes look like little tubes, so I'm going to go on the back side. That way, having that darker color there makes those eyes stand out. And let's see, we could go down here a little bit. There he is. And I think I'll take these darker colors that I've got here and try to add some little tiny details. Not much. I'm just going over what I already have. Now for his antennas, I'd like them to be orange or red, so I'm going to go into my set over here. Let's get some orange and red. Let's take a look at that color. That could work. And let's see, I'm going to practice the brush stroke, maybe thin and wide. Then I'm going to let just the very tip of the brush touch the paper. And let's see, where are we going to go with them? Let's bring some antennas down here. I'll just go ahead and bring some little lines down here. Let's get some of that orange color and just add some little color in his joints to make them fun and exciting. Oh, it makes a huge difference. Okay, I think he's looking pretty good, but I think I'd like to try to push him back a little bit more into his shell so he's safe. So I'm going to go ahead and take my blue. There isn't much blue in here, so I don't need to put really any new blue into it. How about if we take some of that blue? And maybe some of that brown. Let's take some of that burnt sienna, just like that. And let's go ahead, try to, what this is called is glazing. Going over some of those colors like that to push him back. And maybe a little bit over here so we can see his eyes. And we get a few little lines in there. Go underneath. Maybe I'll add a little more pink into his body. Just a tiny bit. I want it to be gray, but I like that little bit of pink in there. I think it makes him more interesting. Then we'll call him done. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this really simple little lesson. It's always a lot of fun to paint these little creatures. So until next time, have fun and happy painting.